Hi, my name is Tony McLaughlin, and I'm talking to Simon Black, who is the CEO of PPRO. Simon, thanks very much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Tony, very much for the opportunity. Delighted to participate.
Hey, Simon, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into the world of payments, and more about PPRO.
I got into payments actually when I was at the Sage Group. Got a great opportunity to run a small business that was recently acquired back in 2006, which was a payment gateway business in the UK, serving SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. Was a small team, but growing. And we were in the right place at the right time, really focused on making things easy for an SME to get up and running, accepting payments online.
Yes. And then you moved into PPRO, which is an aggregator of payment types.
Yes, so the PPRO mostly helps other payments companies globalize their offering by providing access to our platform to literally a whole world of local payment methods. Actually, I got to know PPRO when I was managing SagePay. SagePay, as a payment service provider, became a customer of PPRO. Why? Because we started to get feedback from our merchants. So these were small, medium-sized UK companies getting orders from around Europe, and the consumers were asking them if they could pay with their preferred local payment method. For example, Ideal in the Netherlands, Softwort in Germany, Klarna in Scandinavia. And we realized that this was a real thing. And for the merchants, anything that would help them increase conversion was important to them. Not only important, but they're willing to pay for it.
Yes.
So we looked at the opportunity and realized that actually it would be quite challenging, not only for us to go and build integrations directly, but to manage against the different scheme rules that each local payment method has, as well as figure out the funds flow. Yeah. So we searched for the right partner and fortunately found PPRO. I got to know the company well and was delighted in 2015 to get the opportunity to join as CEO.
Okay, great. So in the jargon of the industry, these domestic payment types we call APMs, or alternative payment methods. I guess APMs just means anything which is not a card. And so essentially they're like domestic schemes which have gained a degree of popularity for primarily domestic use. But then I'm understanding that what you're saying is that international merchants selling into those other countries also subsequently have to accept those methods of payment.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's alternative payments, exactly as you say, have tended to be defined as non-card. There actually are also some card type payment methods which are localized in different parts of the world, which are still very different from mainstream Visa, MasterCard, for example.
Yeah.
Even cards with a Visa logo on in some markets like Brazil or Mexico act very differently and don't go through the Visa network, right, if it's a domestic transaction. So we tend to talk about the wider umbrella of local payment methods, and within that you would have your alternatives, which often might be a wallet, a mobile wallet, or a bank transfer payment method, or a particular local card scheme. So for the international cross-border e-commerce opportunity, accepting local payment methods, alternative payment methods is essential for any merchant, any online retailer that wants to maximize their opportunity.
And that's to do with acceptance rates, right? Because sometimes if you're using a card in an internet in a cross-border environment, then you might suffer, well, I guess you'll suffer higher costs, but you'll also suffer a decline in terms of acceptance rates.
Absolutely. So you would be able to sell. So if we take the Netherlands as an example, so Ideal, which is a great scheme in the Netherlands, it makes it very quick and easy, and as well as safe and secure to pay for your online shopping, your online order direct from your bank account. And it's accounts now for 60% of transactions in that market.
Yes.
So what that means is the majority of consumers, that's their preferred way to pay. That's their habit, right? We all have our habits, like, click. Once we hit checkout, we want to get out of there as quickly as possible. Yeah. And for most Dutch people, that means paying with Ideal. So if you're an international merchant selling into that market, typically it's going to give you increased sales, increased revenue opportunity if you accept Ideal.
I understand. So give us a sense about the breadth and depth of the PPRO network. How many countries do you go into? How many payment methods do you go into?
Our platform today covers 150 distinct schemes. If you wanted to count all the different ways to pay, you'd be around 400.
Yeah.
What we focus more on though is markets. We want to make sure that for one of our partners, merchants, when they're looking at a particular territory, that they have a comprehensive payments offer for that country.
And Simon, so you're kind of like a network of networks. You presumably then go to each of these local payment types and forge relationships, and then present a single interface to your customer.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that single interface, which is for a majority of what we do, literally one interface and API, our partners get it onto our platform, and it's the platform that delivers a huge amount of value across the full value chain of payments, right? The end-to-end funds flow. So it's not only processing in an alternative or local payment method, but we're collecting the funds, we're settling, we're doing the reconciliation, and we're providing reporting, all that can be consumed in a way our customer wants, so they can integrate that into the wider service they're providing to merchants.
So look, I guess in the payment space in the past 10 years, there's been a heck of a lot of hype and public discourse around cryptocurrencies, but it seems to me like the real story has been the rise of the APMs. And coincident with that has been the rise of cross-border e-commerce. So these are the waves that you're surfing on, right? Increased acceptance of alternative payment mechanisms in the local countries, and also increased cross-border e-commerce. Is that a good analysis of the kind of forces that you're playing into?
Yeah, completely. You're completely right. If we think about consumer payments, the way people pay, people like us, but also people around the world, the biggest change in the last 10 years is if we think about online payment methods, online payments, it's been a proliferation of new ways to pay, growth of very local payment methods as well. So some stark examples are WeChat Pay and Alipay in China. I mean, they've literally become a way of life, those apps. They're not just a way to pay, but they've become so popular because they're fully integrated into other financial services applications. And not just online, but if you're in China, whether it's in a store or even street traders I've seen, will be showing a QR code so you can pay with your mobile wallet. And I think that's one of the other big trends which is still evolving and will be accelerated as a result of the COVID pandemic, is a contactless payment or QR code-based payments, changing the way we use our phone and creating an online to offline opportunity for payment methods themselves.
And Simon, I think you said earlier that your customers, is it right, you've got a mix of customers? Some of them are merchants directly and others are other payment services providers. Can you help us understand what the client base is?
So what PPRO provides really is infrastructure, which is very specialized to solve the problem globally of local payments. And typically, majority of merchants are not set up in a way that they could work with us directly.
I see.
But there are a very small number of merchants which have their own payments divisions, where we can work with them directly. Our preference is always to go through one of our PSP partners.
I've got it.
So we work with companies like Citi, like Stripe, like Fiserv, and Checkout.com, many of the leading payments businesses, to help them deliver a fully comprehensive solution to their merchants. I
understand. So you're saying that the merchants typically will be connected into a payment gateway, and then one branch of that payment gateway will then be down into your network of networks to plug into the local payment types.
Correct. Yeah.
So as you have been a keen observer of the payment space, and you're not only an observer, but you're practical hands-on with these APMs around the world, can you point to examples of best practices, schemes that you think work particularly well? A couple of questions I've got around this. One is the ability for non-residents to access schemes, because I think that these schemes are often built with domestic uses in mind or domestic needs in mind. So that's one question. The next question is whether you see any schemes moving towards standardization. These days, many faster payment schemes are built on ISO 20022. Do you think there's any possibility that schemes can do things to encourage interoperability? So two questions. One is access for non-residents, and the second is what can these APMs do to encourage interoperability?
Yeah, I think for the first, a couple of good examples are schemes like Trustly or Klarna, which have really driven themselves to expand internationally. And it's challenging, right, in the way you have to invest a lot more to build out systems and processes that are flexible enough and can cater to local, different local regulatory requirements, different banking networks that you have to plug into. So it is challenging, and I think those are a couple of examples that have done it well. Different companies are taking different approaches. Alipay, for example, have invested in a number of wallets in different areas of Asia, and they have now created a standardization so that a merchant can accept any of those wallets through the same interface, right? So it's a standardized acceptance. So I think that's an example of starting to go in the direction that you're suggesting.
Yeah.
I think also there was a similar European initiative that coincidentally Alipay were part of, with some of the wallets that are present, particularly in Scandinavia. Indeed,
there's a European Mobile Payments Association working on interoperability.
Yeah, so I think interoperability is really important, and it does solve that non-resident issue. But it's challenging, and I think what's always good is to give choice, and retailers want to be able to accept as many different payment methods as possible without significant overhead. And I think you've probably seen some of the images online of like, you know, all this real estate at the checkout with like 3 different terminals and 6 different QR codes and whatever. And I think simplifying that for the merchant is a great initiative, but it's that's one of the challenges I think will take quite some years to address.
Indeed, although there was some interesting news recently about a software-only solution achieving PCI compliance, which may point towards a future where we have less dedicated hardware in the payment acceptance space.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific development, right? Anything that removes friction for either the consumer or the merchant, I think is only a good thing ultimately. When you have those significant changes, there are winners and losers within the payments industry. But I think overall that's a very good development, particularly because it's got the PCI recognition. And I think there were some early movers, let's say, doing things without that accreditation, and that raises concerns over security, which in payments always has to be paramount. So I think the fact that we're there now with the first PCI approved solution is a great step forward.
And Simon, you know, the digital payment space is, I wouldn't say crowded, but it's attracting a lot of attention. There are potentially some new categories of solutions that will enter the market. I'm talking specifically about, you know, stable coins offered by potentially big tech players and consortiums. I'm referring to the potential of central bank digital currencies, you know, offered by governments themselves. There are many initiatives going on. We saw the European Payments Initiative being launched recently. Open banking is in full swing in a number of countries. You know, what's your take on how this stuff plays out? I guess we've had this competition between, you know, physical payments and digital payments, and now we're moving into an era of competition between different forms of digital payments. How do you see this all shaking out?
Thanks for an easy question. So I think, first of all, I think we're at the beginnings of some major change, but some trends really take over a 20, 30 year time frame, right? And if we look back, say, to 30 years ago, to the early 90s, certainly by the mid-90s, it was very clear in many ways where we were heading with the internet, with email, with internet shopping. People were using mobile phones, but we were, it took decades, and there were false dawns, right, with the late 90s or the 99, 2000 boom. And many of the next big things for e-commerce, went out of business. So I think it's important to keep in mind that we're probably talking about 30 years here. So when we talk about open banking, and particularly leveraging open banking to introduce a new and easy way for people to pay, for consumers to pay, I think the huge benefit there is to the merchant, which is to significantly reduce costs. I think there's not a direct benefit to the consumer. So I think the only way that takes off is you assume that some of that cost saving for the merchant, they use to invest in offers for the consumer, right? Either providing purchase guarantees or literally giving them discounts or loyalty points or whatever. So I think that could develop and take off, but I think for the next 10 years, there will only be more fragmentation in terms of how consumers are paying for things.
Interesting. I guess so. It's going to be a process of fragmentation and then consolidation, as we see in many markets, and that's I guess the market mechanism in play. My and finally question, which is to get your kind of thoughtful responses on the strange times that we're all living through. You're the CEO of a fintech, and I'd be interested in your reflections on how you've maintained your business and grown your business through this period. But also personally, what reflections do you take from this period as we potentially gradually move out of lockdown? What are the lessons for you from COVID?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating period to live through. My thoughts are very much from a global perspective, because although PPRO, we're not a huge business, we're currently around 260 people. We are global. We have significant teams from Singapore to Sao Paulo. And clearly what's been happening in the world, I think there's two huge things. One is that health workers everywhere have really been on the front line and have really sacrificed themselves. And it's been a similar story in every country. So I think that's a huge takeaway from a point of appreciation. I think the other is that somehow during this pandemic, we've been through an awakening, at least in much of the world, in the Western world in particular, around still the impact of racism. And I think in particular, the reflection there is the unconscious bias that many organizations and even on an individual level, I've had personal reflections is yes, actually, this is something still happening. And the takeaway, which many people observed, was that we need to be proactive to address that. Everyone needs to be proactive, every institution. Absolutely. And so with that, of course, the priority always for as a CEO is the welfare and well-being of your team. So I'm thankful that very, very few people were affected directly by the virus and nothing too serious. What definitely is affecting possibly everyone is the mental stress. So as CEO, stepped up communications significantly, and we've had a lot more interaction, all virtual like this. But I think there's been a big benefit of that, and that's been a learning, which is actually without a pandemic, we could have been doing more of that. I could have been doing more of that. So we will after the pandemic. I think otherwise people really showed their adaptability and resilience, and we're very fortunate to be a technology business. So as typically with tech businesses, everyone had a laptop. So overnight it was just, okay, I'm working from home, not at the office. And also, as you said earlier, we're in this great space, fortunately, of digital payments, e-commerce. We had very little exposure to travel, so the business has continued to grow at a high rate.
Well done on that, Simon. It's fantastic to hear insights from one of the industry thought leaders. I always enjoy hearing you in conferences and in other forums. You're one of the most well-informed and thoughtful people in the industry. And people is certainly where the action is in terms of the growth of alternative payments. So thank you sincerely for spending time with us today. And, it's great to hear from you.
Many thanks, Tony.